I am a staff writer at Texas Monthly. I'm on the advisory council here. But what's probably more meaningful today is that I'm a writer living in Central Texas, which means that I get to run into these guys a lot. I have a lot of admiration for them. I've gotten to become friends with them. I've asked them for advice. I've been inspired. Rather than go into their bios as long as David just did about me, which is weird. Y'all have got their bios in front of you. I think it'd be better to have the time spent hearing from them. And what I've encouraged them doing, we'll see if it works, but I love the idea that as great writers, I think of great writers, before you get to be that, you start, I think, as a great reader. And so I love the idea that we might be able to get them to talk a little bit about what they enjoy of each other's work and stuff like that. But we'll see where it goes. But I guess first I should check my premise, and so I'll do that with Larry. Do you have to be a great reader to be a great writer? What did you read when you were little? What made you want to do this in the first place?
Oh, thank you, John. Well, I formed a theory about this because both of my sisters are writers as well. And why did that happen? And I think because our mother was kind of neglectful, and she always had her nose buried in a book. And I think we decided if you wanted to get mother's attention, you had to write a book. And so that's my Freudian take on where that came from. I think for me, early on, becoming a writer was a lifestyle choice. I think in part people choose their occupations by the clothes you get to wear. And so I, not a banker or whatever, and so, it's a more relaxed aspect of life. And the other thing is, I had an idea when I was young, if I wanted to be a writer, then I would be a poet in Greenwich Village. And I don't read poetry, I don't know what I was thinking, and I had no idea what the rent was like in Greenwich Village, and so when my wife and I spent 2 years in Cairo teaching English, and when we came back, I was ready to assume my duties as a poet, but surprisingly, no one was interested. And I found out that in order to make a living as a writer in that situation, I had to offer something that was fresh, and that was information. And that's what steered me into journalism. And later, I was able to take up fiction when I could afford to do it. But for most part of my career, I was training myself to become a writer as a journalist.
Sarah, you've talked about, and I didn't see everybody's names. I should have done that. Sarah Bird is next to me in case you can't see their name tags. Steve Harrigan next to her, Elizabeth Crook next to him, and then Larry, of course, at the end. If y'all could each talk about the stuff that got you inspired to do this, because I know, Sarah, we've talked before about how you said A Confederacy of Dunces and Wizard of Oz were foundational texts in your life.
That's kind of my writing genome there. And I think, I really distinctly remember the experience of reading Wizard of Oz because I essentially had to teach myself how to read in order to read it. My family, Air Force family, we were being transferred from, we'd been stationed at Mather Air Force Base, and we were transferred to Yokota Air Base outside of Tokyo. Then we left. I don't know why in those days, this was 1956, but the Air Force was putting on the dog for a captain and his family, and we traveled on this presidential liner, which was so glamorous and fabulous. And our first dinner there, before we left San Francisco Harbor, we sat around and just treated ourselves royally. And I remember this very vividly. Had scallops and parfait. I remember that very vividly as I was upchucking those as soon as the ship started moving. And I never stopped. I just turned into a snow globe from that point forward. And So, while my brothers and sisters were rampaging around playing shuffleboard and having the deck steward serve them bouillon, being in best smile contest, I was way down next to the boiler and just really sick as a dog and thump, thump, thump. And my mom every now and then would come up, when she'd get time from her other rampaging children, and read a little bit of Wizard of Oz to me. And so I was 6 years old at the time, and child, a nervous temperament, way too nervous for the constantly moving, always being the new girl lifestyle. And so she started reading me a book about a girl who is in this happy little world that she knows and is safe in, and here comes a cyclone and whirls her around and takes her away and dumps her into this strange, strange world filled with strange people that she doesn't know. And so it's one new challenge after another. And I said, well, clearly this is my life. Dorothy of Gale is the patron saint of military kids. And I'd started learning to read, but I wanted to read this book so badly that I just remember being there, and fighting the Dramamine and the urge to throw up, and that experience, which I subsequently read other people have had, about all those little squiggles turning into words, and it transformed my life. And then, of course, Confederacy of Dunces, which, a lot of fart jokes, and I laughed my ass off.
Either of y'all, what got you doing this?
With me, it was my mom for a different reason, and it was because she read to us every night for 3 hours, because there were three of us, and so she had a book going with my older brother and with me and with my younger sister, and we all listened in on each other's books. So I was often listening to books that were sort of above my level and also below my level, but that was just the family time, and nobody had to really sit still. Everybody was kind of moving around the room, doing whatever they wanted to be doing, coloring or whatever, but everybody was listening. And it was a huge array of books that she read, and everything from science fiction, but a lot of historical fiction. And I think she really made me comfortable with sort of jumping out of, my own very, regular life into these other worlds. And often the books that she chose, I think they were supposed to be a lesson to us, because they were a lot of books about hardship and very grim things. And like the little matchstick girl, she's selling matches and she can't sell enough and she freezes to death because she doesn't want to go home. Those kinds of stories. And they were our bedtime stories. And they were often frightening and alarming, and often about kids in poverty. I mean, she was trying to get across the message with a lot of them that not everybody, has a really safe, nice life, and you need to be aware. And so, along with it being entertaining, she read all the Tolkien books, she read all the C.S. Lewis books. Along with that, there were also these buried lessons that became conversations in the family. And so it was just incredibly formative, and it also made me very comfortable with kind of moving into another time frame, on a daily basis, since I write historical fiction, and sort of living in that time frame for a period of time, and then going back to my regular life. So she is a great mom, and I have a lot of appreciation for the fact that she did that and valued those books and gave us all that. My sister's a poet, and gave us that appreciation. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of early reading, obviously, this is obvious statement, begins with people's mothers, and I remember learning to read without realizing it when I was 3, 4 something years old, because you hear your mother's voice, and it animates these squiggles, as you call them, on the page, and through all this repetition, I remember learning to read in first grade, but I kind of felt like I could already do that, and just because it was so comforting, I think, and I remember when I was about 6, 7, maybe, I had some money to spend at the drugstore in Abilene, where we lived, and I went in, and there was this Hardy Boys book, those rotating racks, and there was this Hardy Boys book called The Crisscross Shadow, which I thought was such a great title. And there was this really atmospheric cover illustration of, I can't remember the name of the, Frank and Joe, were that the name of the Hardy Boys? I can't remember. But
I've
they
got
were
an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and yes.
Yeah, right. But they were digging a hole or something, and it was like a moody, atmospheric thing. And I used my money to buy that instead of buying a toy. And I came out of the drugstore, and I remember the look in my mother's eyes. Like, wow, I'm proud of him. Like he's done something that I didn't expect. And then much later, I was reading, in high school, I read a lot of just big, giant novels. Dostoevsky, Margaret Mitchell, whatever. It didn't, Leon Uris, Tolstoy. I'd made no distinction between as long as they were long, and preferably if they were, set in the past. Like I read, I don't know if anybody reads Kenneth Roberts much anymore, but Northwest Passage and all those kind of books that he wrote were really influential to me. And I remember another moment that was kind of odd, but I must have been, 12 or something, and I got this present for my birthday, and it was, my mother gave me the Memoirs of Arthur Crock. And who was Arthur Crock? He was this New York Times columnist that I'm sure she didn't know who it was. But I think what happened was she went to the bookstore at 6 Points in Corpus Christi and said to the bookseller, "I've got this son, I don't know what's going on with him, but he just likes to read and he's kind of hard to place." And they handed her the Memoirs of Arthur Crock. And so I never read it, but I was impressed that I would get that as a birthday present. So I think I kept getting reinforced all along the way that yes, being a writer or being a reader is an important thing in one's life.
Well, so I've been meaning to read that. Can I borrow it?
Yeah,
You still have it?
I'll have to check and make sure I still. If I don't have it, I will give it to you as a present.
Hey, I love it. I like that. You're so giving that way, yeah. And that's actually where I was headed next, because Sarah, you told me earlier this week when we were talking that Steve was helpful to you when you were doing your first book.
Oh, Steve has been like so helpful to me, and even before we met. And I may have mentioned this to you, but it's verges on stalkery. But I read a column, and this was, I can't remember the exact year, but at that time I was writing first-person columns for Cosmo magazine, and I thought that was quite swanky. And then I read a column in Atlantic magazine written by a certain Steve Harrigan, and it talked about his Catholic boyhood in Corpus Christi and being a fighting shamrock. And that just had such a huge impact on me. Because I had been like a fighting rosary or something, not that. I also had a Catholic girlhood in Texas, and it just really, I really remember reading that essay and what an impact it had on me. And I think, what that gave me, as well as, Larry's work and Bill's work and the models that they've presented, is it just gave me a sense of possibility about how, the broader topics I could maybe attack, other than, is he what kind of boyfriend is he? Why do you like this guy? And how did this 5 tips to know when he's cheating on you? And I thought, I can do something bigger. I can get into the fighting shamrocks. So, but that was real. I mean, I had not met Steve. Subsequently, and once again, it was the sense of possibility that he presented, and Larry as well, and certainly Bill, to a person living in Austin, Texas, that you could write screenplays. That was really, really huge in my life, that like somebody, pretty normal regulation issue, 2 arms, 2 legs, human, also living in the same place that I did, was writing screenplays. And that really was an inspiration for me. But, since that time, Steve has, it's almost eerie how he's foreshadowed every step of my career, or else I've just copied everything he's ever done. Being a screenwriter and essayist, and I was doing that before. But yeah, and we, of course, have talked about various books, and at this particular moment, he's so in my head with his writing, and I just told Steve this, because I'm attempting to work on a book that has a lot of diving in it, and so I said, well, I need to consult the master. And I've been reading his book, Water and Light, about his experiences of diving, and it is so, that just, went past inspiring and then got completely depressing because it's so well written. It's just crushingly well written. And so I told Steve,
that's why nobody reads it.
Hey, no, it's the model. It's the model. As Molly Ivins once told me in regards to Steve Harrigan, he is the master of stylist. So on that.
Okay, we move to another topic.
John, I just want to interject.
I wish he could be with us today, but we remember Steve.
Steve has been helpful to everybody on this panel.
Yeah.
And, he's a signal figure in the Austin community, and he's read all my drafts. He's never read anything I've finished. So he's always had the worst take of it. But
just make it better and take my leave.
He's left a legacy of younger writers too, and so I just want to acknowledge that and not let it go by.
Well, that's really, I'm really grateful to both of you, but I also think the acknowledgement for this group, I think, has to go to Bill Wittliff. Because none of us would be here without him. And Sarah mentioned how important he was to her in screenwriting, and Larry and I wouldn't be screenwriters without Bill. And I don't know that. Well, obviously, none of us would be here without Bill. And he was the kind of the glue that cemented the Texas writing world, I think. And
I got off to kind of a rugged start with him. I had a play when we first moved here, and I was looking, the theater company that was going to put it on went out of business just before it was supposed to open. And so I had to raise the money, because that's what playwrights are supposed to do, I guess. And so I went around asking people to invest in the play. So I went to Bill. I never met him before, and I said, would you like to invest in it and hear it and read it? He said, no, I'm not gonna, it's not any good. That's how we got. That's how we got started, and they're probably right about it, because all my other investors were left owing a lot of money. So.
With Bill, I never really understood exactly what the phrase generosity of spirit meant until the friendship with Bill and thinking about the kind of stuff you're talking about. But in what we've got up here, too. But we'll get to that in a sec. Back to y'all for the minute. Elizabeth, you said you've collaborated on screenplays with both Steve and Larry?
No, just with
Steve. Okay.
Yes, we're doing. My last novel was The Which Way Tree, and we've done the screenplay together. Steve and I have, which is really interesting because we have always. I've always given my work. And I'm in the same situation. He doesn't read the very finished one, which is frustrating. He always reads the rough drafts and makes the pointers, and then you're able to take the ones you like and leave the ones you don't, and you have control over that. But with a screenplay, and you have to collaborate, nobody's in charge, and so it's a really different experience. If you're handing somebody a manuscript and saying, what do you think? And they give you the advice, you take it or you don't. With a screenplay, you have to really kind of duke it out at places. So it was interesting after 30 years of sharing manuscripts to suddenly have to agree on everything. And, just kind of go, mono to mono about a lot of, the dialogue or the scene or anything else. But it has been really fun. It's a lot more fun than writing novels because it's collaborative. And also because there's the sense that, if it's not good, it's not really all your fault. I mean, you're not responsible for the whole thing. So you can disagree and say, well, that was because he wanted that line in there. And and also then, if it becomes a movie, then, there are a lot of other people at play that you could blame it on if it's not any good. So there's something really liberating about the whole movie thing. Not that this is a movie yet, but if it is, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to how fun it would be to make it.
Steve and I were going to be screenwriters for a while because we got.
We were
screenwriters, but it wasn't exactly a triumph. But it started off with Bill nominating us to go to Sundance for the screenwriting workshop. And a month before we were, hoping to go, we find out we're supposed to have submitted a script, which I don't know why it hadn't occurred to us that we had to write a script. So we sat down, and in 3 weeks, I think it was, we wrote a script about, we'd both written about astronauts as reporters, and so we wrote a script about an old astronaut who gets back into the shuttle and falls in love with a new woman astronaut, and Sundance turned it down. And Sidney Pollack bought it. And so suddenly we're off to Hollywood. And we went out and, we stayed in a nice hotel, one that Bill had recommended, and we came out the morning of the meeting with Sydney, the first morning. We met at the elevator. We were both wearing the exact same clothes. So back to the closet, can't do that. So, but all of that was generated by Bill. And but the mere fact that he, as a screenwriter, didn't leave Austin was the key to the foundation stone around which just as Texas Monthly became the foundation stone and it attracted us to Austin originally, the movie industry all goes back to that obstreperous decision of his that he was going to stay put.
That's pretty cool.
You should tell about your meeting with Jane Fonda.
One of our better unproduced scripts was about. I had read in a newspaper about a women's soccer team called the Hot Flashes. It was women over 40 soccer team, and Jane at that time had her workout tapes, and so. Did we write the script before we went to, or we proposed it, I think?
Yeah, we did it. It was a proposal.
It was a proposal. She snapped it up. She's over 40. She's going to show off. And so we went to her house in Santa Monica. And we had one really brilliant, the first time she came out, in her office, she was so glamorous, and she had her leonine hair, and she looked like she could jump over a building. And she stuck, these piercing blue eyes, and she stuck out her hand. And she said, "Hi, I'm Jane Fonda." And I said, "Hi, I'm Steve Harrigan." It's like,
Oh my God.
some minor stroke or something. I don't know what happened. Steve said, "No, you're not." And she never called us by name after that.
I think that project was doomed from that moment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
One thing that's really interesting, John, I think it's true for you to some degree too, because you've written screenplays, but all of us, like Sarah has written screenplays. You and I share a producer in common, Robert Homey, as did Bill. And you've written journalism and fiction. Elizabeth doesn't talk so much about her nonfiction, but she's written 3 or 4 really great magazine pieces. We've written screenplays together. She writes books. Larry and I have written screenplays together. Larry, of course, is the master, nonfiction writer and best-selling novelist. And so there's something about, the kind of cross-fertilization that we all have as writers that I think really keeps us interested, and interested in each other too, because we can talk shop with each other on various, across various genres.
Yeah, that was so invaluable to me when I, went into this strange Hollywood world in this brief window when there was this big rush on for spec scripts. And so Hollywood, LA people would fly writers in and out and put you up in swanky places. But it was such an impenetrable, odd world. And it was so wonderful to have Steve and Bill and Larry to talk to kind of how you understand these impenetrable signals and the byways of Hollywood.
Well, and Austin isn't, it hasn't seemed to me, it's not competitive as far as the writers. The writers are not competitive with each other. There's a real sense of collaboration and affirmation, and it's just a very warm sense. I remember, our friend Steve Weinberg talking about this when he came from Harvard, that feeling when he arrived at UT as the teacher in physics, and he won the Nobel Prize, and he said, they lit up the tower, they turned the tower orange, and just that at Harvard there was just more of a sense of, you're sort of on your own, and there's some jealousy and some a sense of competitiveness, but then in Austin it was very welcoming, and I think it is that way. I know I really have made almost all my friends through, the writing community in Austin, and when I first moved there, I was, divorced and depressed, and nothing was going right, and I had never sold anything I ever wrote, and I ended up with Steve as my editor for a book that was going to be published by Texas Monthly until Texas Monthly was bought by Gulf Publishing, and then that all didn't happen. But
the book happened.
The book happened. Yes, it was bought by Doubleday then, so I was lucky. But the first social event I went to was Steve's 40th birthday party, and that's I met most of the people that I'm friends with now at that party, and most of them were writers, a lot of them at Texas Monthly, and it really was just a very welcoming sense. It was like here I was, at age 35, and finally finding, this group of people that was so warm and wonderful and had all these interests that I shared, and it really has a good feeling in Austin in that way.
There was a party, speaking of parties, that made me decide to leave where I was. In Atlanta, Georgia, I was, I had a job with a magazine that lasted for 4 issues, and but we stayed for 7 years. And my first book came out, and there was a bookstore, is mainly a used bookstore, but they had book signings. Actually, I think they were just parties. I don't recall anybody ever signing anything. But this shop, the Old New York Bookshop, it was called. When a writer would write something like that, he would open up the champagne that was so cheap it would give you a headache the moment the cork popped. And there was a guy going around pouring champagne down ladies' dresses. And these were the intellectuals. And so Marshall Frady was had sponsored. Wow. He was an old South writer with an amazing vocabulary, and he undertook to take this guy out and administer a little schoolyard justice, and broke his hand hitting him, and the police came twice. This was a book about the Amish that I'd written. I thought, what am I doing here? I just felt so out of place. And so right after that, the offer by Bill Broyles to come to Texas came in, and I said, I can't get out of here fast enough. And immediately, first thing I met Steve, we were driving the same car. We both had the car seat, and the whole thing, it was like we're living very parallel lives, and we became very close friends almost instantly, and then all the community that we all share, I think has blossomed in the period of time that we've been allowed to be in Austin and be writers.
It's cool that gets it back to Bill, because when I think about what's so great about the collections, they do, Bill and Sally, let's be frank, it's both of y'all. It's a great achievement that we're all benefiting from, but it does two things. it celebrates the writers, the creators, the artists, the photographers, whoever, whose stuff is here. It's preserved and it's treated the way it should be, and kept going. But then also for the younger writers that want to come and use it as research or for inspiration or whatever, your stuff is here, right? A Sarah Bird fan is not going to have a better, aside from sitting in their room with a Sarah Bird novel, this would be the next best place in the world.
Well, they can try on my bathrobe. No, I literally, the bathrobe that I wrote 5 novels is here. Yeah, please, be my guest.
If you don't see me after this, I'm going to be in the back somewhere putting a bathrobe on, I think. I want to try it on. But I mean, like, what has this meant? What does the Wittliff collections mean? Maybe I'll start with you, Steve. What does this place do for...
Well, I just want you to know my appendix is here.
Okay.
What? I wrote this movie, and they needed somebody to play this patient getting his appendix out. So I had my one speaking line ever in a movie as this patient, and then they made a rubber appendix to take out of my body, and I generously donated that to the Wittliff collections. So I know that some young writer will come here someday and open this box and think, "Wow, I want to be that guy." But no, it's Bill told me very specifically when he and Sally were thinking of starting this is a place of inspiration, and it's a place of scholarship, and I think that's wonderful. But if I had been, when I was starting out as a writer, if I had known there was a place like this, and I could come here and see, the false starts of Cormac McCarthy or Sam Shepard or Sandra Cisneros or anybody or Sarah Bird, I would, look at Elizabeth's chart for her novel Promised Lands. I mean, that is one of the great artifacts of American literary history. And it should actually be kind of the first thing that greets you when you come in here in some ways, because it's insane. It is it's a giant poster board of all her characters and what they're doing on any given day in 1835 and 1836.
Well, everything that happened during the Texas Revolution every day. So if the Mexican army in Goliad had X number of cannon and it was recorded somewhere, or if the weather was bad and somebody wrote that in their journal that day, so that everything is, it's just the entire, and it's actually continued in a couple of notebooks that I hope are appended with it, because I ran out of room, because each day is only about 2 inches big. And so it's very tiny writing, but you can see just exactly how those days in the Texas Revolution unfolded and where everybody was. And so it's more about the historical record from, all the writings of that period, but also, within where I was going to put my characters, as you said.
But my point being, I guess, if you're a 14-year-old kid and you walk into this place and you see that, you would think, oh, that's how people write novels. It's not, it's messy and it's monomaniacal and it's, but it's not, there's no magic to it. There's just hard work and just dogged imagination. And
people do it in their bathrobes.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so, I mean, that to me is, this is, just
I remember Bill saying that when I was embarrassed to give my drafts, because there's no resemblance between my first drafts and my final drafts, and I was really reluctant. And he said, that really is the point, is just to show that it starts out really bad and really rough, and then it gets better until it gets right. And so I sort of swallowed my pride, and I don't know how many cubic feet are here of these terrible drafts I've written, but they're all here because Bill made me give them to him.
As long as you're talking about Promised Lands, why don't you talk about how the two of you shared the same characters?
We have cameo appearances of each other's characters. So that I was writing Promised Lands at the same time he had started writing, or a little bit before he had started writing Gates of the Alamo. So we decided that, and then there was Jeff Long, a friend of ours, was also writing a book at the same time. So we decided, Jeff's was centered more, mine was centered more on Goliad, Steve's on the Alamo, and Jeff's was centered more on San Jacinto. And so we decided we'd each have the other's characters appear sometimes in the other books. And so after my book was published, it was so weird. I was reading, one of the drafts of Gates of the Alamo, and there's Toby, my character, and he's like sitting at a fire where I didn't put him, and saying things that I didn't make him say, and it was the strangest experience. It was like, he'd come to life, and so it was really fun just to have these little. Probably nobody would ever notice it, but
We're still waiting for the doctoral thesis about this. And nobody's ever written.
I'm not sure anybody's ever pointed it out, right? It happened. Nobody's noticed, but it was fun for us. Yeah. It was great.
It's pretty cool. Somebody was going to hold up a sign. Are we close to? I don't know where they're going. I'll keep going. I'll talk. What's a Texas writer? Is that a limiting term?
I think it's a term you have to accept, but not let yourself be defined by. And it's. I haven't heard the term in a while. It used to be thrown around a lot more than it is now as a kind of parochial designation. Now I think it's more a geographical designation, and I think partly that has to do with the fact that Texas is less isolated than it used to be from the rest of the country, and you don't have to think of yourself in those terms anymore. But at the same time, I'm happy to embrace the idea that I live in Texas and write a lot about Texas, but not exclusively about
right.
it.
It used to be a trap, and your books would be all in Texana, and also we started this thing called Texas Writers Month years ago, because the bookstores didn't know who the writers were, and they had no idea, and so went around different cities introducing writers and bookstore owners. And like in Austin, the bookstore owners were sitting on one side, and Steve and Sarah, you were there, I think, yeah. And Bud Shrake, and Bill may have been there too. On the other side of the table were bookstore owners, and they were talking about this golf book that they couldn't keep in stock. People were buying boxes of the book when it came in on the dollies, and I said, well, Bud wrote that book. He's here? It was, they had no idea. They didn't have a clue. And that's not true anymore. I think that writers and bookstore owners have a much better relationship. And, we often appear in bookstores and go in and sign books, but that was back in the day when Texas writers were considered so regional, right, that they couldn't get respect in the state nor outside it.
But now I think it's more that you get relegated into the classification of being writing a Western. If it's historical, if there's livestock and people are wearing hats, it's going to be a Western. If it takes place in Texas, if there's livestock and people are wearing hats and it takes place up north, there's no real, it can be the Civil War period, or it can be, pre-Civil War period or something. It's not necessarily a Western. But so I think that is more than it being a Texas book, it becomes a Western if it's historical, which is, a little bit limiting, as you say, or a little bit confining somewhat.
Yeah, I think when I published my first quote-unquote real novel, Alamo House, there was mostly confusion and a lack of understanding about what Texas was. And my editor at that time, he decided he'd get into a little dialogue rewriting for me, and so he suggested that one of my characters say, "show 'nuff." SHONUF, like sure enough loves to beat my feet in the Mississippi mud. And then on the cover they had a saguaro cactus, which they only grow in Arizona, and that sort of became a repeating motif. So once again, I was like, oh, there's the saguaro cactus. But I think now, certainly recently, now that Austin and environs have become the groove center of the universe, people are very aware of Texas. And whereas in the past it was like, oh, regional versus if it's set in Manhattan or Brooklyn, it's it's a universal experience. But now it's kind of a value add for publishers, I believe.
Well, it's interesting because like McMurtry's stuff is, some of it is here, which is a great thing that we have at the Wittliff. He famously wore that T-shirt or sweatshirt that said minor regional novelist on it when he was in the late 60s. But he did, when he started writing about contemporary life in Texas and urban life, it's a side of a part of Texas no one had seen before. And so I think one of my very favorite Texas books is How Perfect Is That? But it's set in West Austin now, and I recognize every single thing that happens. I don't know if y'all have read it. If you have, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm almost certain it's about my wife. She doesn't do nearly, she doesn't have a Xanax problem. She doesn't carry that cocktail around with her. But I love that book. It's set in Texas. It's a geography thing, but that is not a Texas. You wouldn't. It doesn't go in the Texana section.
Yeah, I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, is this based on so and so and so and so?" Most of it I just took from reading People magazine and lifestyles of the rich and famous kind of stuff. So yeah, there was some identification also.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sarah, you might talk about your long nap at the Texas Writers
Month.
You have a little bit of an experience.
I don't know
with this.
what you're talking about. To what might you be referring? No, I had a little moment of mismedication, and that was, unfortunately, it was very public. This was 2010, I believe, Texas Book Festival, and I was going to moderate a panel. I was like playing the big room. It was in the Senate chambers, and it was for a novel that I just admired exorbitantly. Maybe I'm wrong. Billy Lynn's
Long Halftime Walk.
That was not 2010, was it?
It might have been.
It might have been.
that was later, I
I want to say it's a little bit more recent, but I don't know.
The meds are kicking in again. So I prepared a lengthy list of questions, and I said I definitely don't want to be nervous, so I will take along some beta blockers. And this is it just stops. It's like the speaker's friend. It's a blood pressure medication and stops your heart from thumping and whatnot. Very, very easygoing. So I pop those into my purse, and I'm driving over there, and then I start feeling my heart thudding as I think about facing the Senate chambers, and I park in one of these spiraling parking garages. And as I'm finding a place, I snake my hand into my purse because, of course, I'm running a little late. Get the bottle on my, beta blockers. I'm going to be calm in a moment. Pop 2 in my mouth, and that's the last thing I remember because they were Ambien. Yeah, from that point forward, that the rest of the day just kind of, came in reports, and people use terms like zombie, and I tried to. You were making tea, and you poured orange juice into it, and I have no recollection of this, none whatsoever. But thank you for bringing that up.
Sarah, where did you write about that?
My finest literary moment.
Where was that?
I wrote about it for Texas Monthly, so it's not any secret because it was so public.
But she is one of the most gifted comic writers. I remember so vividly reading that, and there's just this natural comic ability that you have that's very difficult to pull off. It's really just.
Thank you.
It feels effortless, and particularly if you haven't read Recent studies indicate, is that the name of it?
Wow,
Yes,
you're
I
one of the
collected?
5 people that read
Well,
that.
no, and
Thank
you know, this,
you.
books of essays, as three of us know, do not sell very well, but they often, I think, are some of our best work. And I think that I really recommend that book because it is so hilarious. It's a lot of your columns for Texas Monthly and other places. But anyway, just
Thank you.
I just remember I remember hearing about this event. Yeah, but reading about it was just another level of experience.
Yeah.
It seems like a weird note to end the panel on. Although now I want to, when I go get the
Nap time.
when I get the bathrobe in the back, I'm going to check the pockets, see what I can find. If y'all would applaud them, thank you. But also,
Thank you, John.
we're applauding Bill and Sally right now too. So Bill and Sally as well in the Wittliff collections. Everybody up here.